Thank you for listening to Ivy Podcast, where we feature weekly leadership conversations with thought leaders and industry experts. Now, here is your host, Fred Obeiro.
Hello and welcome to the Ivy Podcast. My guest today is Fatimah Abuchi, founder and CEO of Agile Management Office. She is also the founder of Return of the Panda, a not-for-profit focused on improving the mental health of the millions of anxiety sufferers worldwide. Hey Fatimah, that's a lot of things that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Fred, for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, we're happy to have you. Before we start this episode, I have one small request to our listeners. As we continue to grow the Ivy Podcast, we would appreciate if you took just a minute of your time to leave us a review on the show, because reviews make a huge difference to podcast channels like ours. Now, time for the episode with Fatimah. Fatimah, you've been doing project management work for quite a long time. Describe yourself and your background to our audience so that they can get a sense of who you are.
Yeah, I've been doing this now for just over 18 years. Interestingly, like many people in the project management profession, I fell into it by accident. I had no concept of projects, let alone project management early on in my life. I was always the type of person that would give anything a shot. And I recall basically not succeeding into university at the time, wasn't able to get the right enter score to be part of that. So I went straight into the workforce when I was really, really young. And as a result of doing that, it ended up meaning that I was able to start gaining practical experience in organizations. My first organization that I supported had 55,000 employees globally. It was a global manufacturing giant that's still around today. And during that time, very early on in my career, I started to support projects and departments within IT around administration. And it was just something I started to do. Then naturally, I started doing administration on projects. And that's where I started getting a sense of what project management really was. And it's basically from there, I just started moving through industry after industry and different companies as a contractor for the last 18 years to sort of build up that knowledge so I can empathize with project managers, and have worked across about 16 different countries, also about 25 different companies, and also about 16 to 18 different industries so far. And I'm not stopping yet. So it's been a very whirlwind of a career so far.
16 countries, that's a lot. Do you have to travel to all these countries? And by the way, to our listeners, Fatimah is based in Sydney, Australia?
Melbourne, Australia.
Melbourne, Australia, my mistake. But yeah, so do you get to travel to all these countries, or do you do this remotely?
No, I actually have traveled to 16 countries. Considering I had a fear of flying, that's a remarkable moment for me. But the biggest piece of work that has led me to international travel has been supporting a global implementation program for a Big Four bank, which saw me go across the Asia Pacific region. And then also we've got a global partnership with a Danish university as well. So I've been to Europe, into Denmark as a result of that partnership as well. And yeah, it's been great, but having the ability to travel for work, obviously not recently, but has been one of the great things of my roles.
That's amazing. So lots of companies have now adopted Agile methodology as it relates to how they run their projects. What are some of the new trends in the horizon that will heavily impact project management from your perspective?
This is an interesting one, because depending on who you talk to, they'll say to you, Agile is not a methodology, et cetera, et cetera. But the truth is there is an inordinate amount of methods that sit under the umbrella of Agile. There is, depending on who you talk to, it goes from, this 6, 10, 15, 20, I think there's 25, talking to some Agile coaches recently as to the scale of which the methodologies in that space are rising. And I think one of the biggest trends I'm seeing, particularly in the last 2 or 3 years more so, is that Agile started sort of within the IT space, but now it's becoming much, much greater than that. And you're seeing entire organizations transform the way they do operations from, human resources, sales, product management, etc. So one of those trends I would say is the Agile moving away from just IT to whole of enterprise.
Correct.
I think one of the other things I'm also seeing that may be an impact to project managers is the role of a product manager or a product owner, which, in an agile sort of framework is quite senior in terms of decision making, etc. So typically those roles are the ones that are they're having, to do some of the work that project managers do, but sometimes large organizations still have them. And so working closely with product managers and product owners is really imperative for project managers that still are around in these organizations. And then one of the other things I think is going to become even more prevalent is the coaching element. When it comes to Agile, the impact to project managers is they need to be better at coaching and the soft skills associated with project management, because that's what's going to help them succeed in an Agile environment.
So I want to circle back to something that you just said, which is the role of project managers and product managers working together on the same project. This is actually something that I wrote about on the book. I don't want to plug my book here, but I find this to be very relevant, especially in today's world. How do you, as a project manager, just give us your opinion. How do you, as a project manager, work with a product manager who, let's say, the organization has never had a situation where a project manager and a product manager are working together on the same project? How do you delineate who does what on the project? Do you have any experience with that?
Yeah, absolutely. At the moment, I'm in an organization where we've got that exact situation, although it's very common as well. So one of the key things I see, and now I will say that there's interchangeable skills, but ultimately a product owner or a product manager ultimately is an SME or a subject matter expert in that particular product or, product suite. So they should and need to understand the product inside and out from a customer's perspective and how it fits into the rest of the organization. Whereas in project management, it's all focused around delivery excellence and delivery expertise. So the project manager and product managers need to work really closely because they both have to work together because they both typically have different skill sets. Now you will get some people that have experience in both and they can do the role, but ultimately I find that project managers help to deliver on either new products or enhancements of products for an organization. And so they actually work in parallel with one another to make the change happen.
That's great. Let's segue to the virtual teams that we're seeing cropping up, basically in most countries, most companies worldwide. Virtual and hybrid teams, they're now a basic structure of project teams for most projects. Mm-hmm. What strategic recommendations can you share on how project teams can succeed without being co-located?
So it's interesting because thankfully through the work that I did previously around, the global project management office space, I had to work with global teams because we couldn't travel every day to the countries that we were working with. So this one's really interesting. What I'm seeing most prevalent at the moment is in regards to we need to make sure that there is clarity in terms of the structure and to ensure that people don't have a perception of power that maybe doesn't actually exist. And the way that you would do that is by clarifying roles and responsibilities. It sounds really simple, but having a clear RACI to support the understanding across the organization, across the team would help with, removing that perception of power that some people might think that they have if we don't clarify. So that would be one of the first things that I would recommend. The second thing I would think is all around knowledge management. So global, hybrid, virtual teams, it's all about consistent communications that you can access at your own leisure. So don't assume that everything that you do communication-wise within an organization needs to be at a set time and everyone needs to be present, because working globally, it doesn't work like that. It's actually quite challenging. So you have to have use different tools to enable you to communicate with audiences in different ways that they can access in their own time as well, such as recording meetings is one of the things that we like to do as well. And then probably the other one I would say is sort of deliberate moments for engagement and collaboration. We assume too much that the moments we get around the water cooler and all of those sorts of situations that we don't have anymore, particularly when we're working in a hybrid virtual environment, that we don't need that anymore, but we do, and it actually creates moments. So I would suggest putting in a lot of proactive effort to putting and creating deliberate moments for your team for greater collaboration, providing them feedback and making sure they've got the right tools to be supported.
The feedback part is actually very important because you may be in a situation where you don't get to see your manager, especially face to face, everything is virtual, and the ideology applies out of sight, out of mind. A lot of people may tend to take advantage of that. Other people may slack off. So it's a delicate balance, especially in project teams, and you want to make sure that everybody on the team is pulling their weight. So thanks for sharing that.
You're really welcome. And I think, Fred, the reason that's so important is because when you're in an office environment, a lot of organizations have visual tools like visual walls and all these sorts of things. You can see what's going on. But if you're working remotely, the biggest challenge is that you make not you, of course, but people make a lot of assumptions around what's going on. So I was talking to one team yesterday and was explaining to them the importance of governance within their department. And once I did that, they were like, "Oh, wow, I didn't realize governance was so important, like so big and so important." They now understand. So you have to get communications and knowledge in a way that makes sense for them and the location and the way that they are working. So yeah, it's really important to build that culture.
What are some of the best approaches to handling conflicts within hybrid project teams? Please share any examples you may have.
So I did touch on RACI already. People underestimate that. So I will reiterate that. That's one of the first things I look at when working within a new organization. One of the things I've been doing recently with teams is creating a team agreement. So this is an agreement done by the squads or by the streams, particularly those that are working in a sort of that, agile waterfall hybrid environment. So having a team agreement that is not dictated by management around how you work together, what your roles are, what your expectations, team planning, team engagement. Let the teams decide that themselves. Now, you won't get 100% agreement, but at least if they do it together, they're more likely to support it. So I would stress that a team agreement activity would be one of the first things that I would do in addition to the RACI. And then I would say also you need to make sure there's a level playing field. So often those that are onshore will assume that the people offshore need to adjust their time zone and the way that they work to keep up with us. But just because there's a larger team, say in Melbourne, it doesn't mean that the people that are offshore are any less important. So you need to create that equal playing field. And you can do that by listening and actually then applying some of the lessons and feedback you're getting and then tracking it visually and visibly, so people can see that you're actually making change by listening to them.
Most project managers have had to deal with at least one difficult stakeholder on a project. I know I've dealt with a lot more than one. How do you normally go about managing difficult stakeholders who may have differing opinions on a project's direction?
So this one's really interesting because it is something that does happen almost every single time. And it is something we have to work with. Yeah, 100%. So one of the things that I would say is I try wherever I can to get to a general agreement on, maybe it's not necessarily the agreement on, the thing that they're debating or the ideas that they're challenging, etc., but more just getting an agreement on, for example, we're doing this particular project or we're developing this product for the customer. Do we agree on that? Now, typically getting them to agree on something is better than disagreeing on everything.
It's the first step. Yeah.
Correct. It's 100%. It's the first step. And then you need to listen. So often we make assumptions that what we think is, the most accurate or correct. And we sometimes don't have time. Everyone's so busy, but you need to listen. So I would typically listen to the concerns of the stakeholder. And I had a really challenging technology manager that I used to work with a few years ago, and it didn't matter what we did. She just absolutely disagreed with everything. And there will be people that are like that.
There's that everywhere.
It is. It's everywhere, and you can't get away from that. So I think one of the things you can't get away from, and everybody will have to agree with, is the facts. So again, back to knowledge management, one of the things that I like to do is utilize facts, not emotion, to have discussions with these difficult people, and give them an opportunity to share that I'm listening, and then show them that there's, it's not just, they say there's no I in team. So it's about the team. And if one person is being challenging and the rest of the team's on board, then we just need to work together to move forward to a point where we can get an agreement on what it is that we're trying to do. But it is a case-by-case basis. I can't tell you that I've done the same thing with each. The one thing I will do, though, is always listen to their point of view, because I may be missing something.
Yeah, you got to be open to other people's opinions. And I think you hit the nail on that. Now, I want to talk about the future of project management, based on how you see it. Advanced technologies such as artificial intelligence and machine learning are becoming part of new innovations being introduced in many organizations. Do you foresee such technologies affecting the role played by project managers in the workplace?
Yeah, 100%. I think there definitely is. One of the things I would say is that I think it's more on project management as a whole, as opposed to the individual project managers.
Uh-huh.
And the reason I say that is because project managers need to, if they're not already focusing more than ever on their soft skills, which you can't replace. So I think that sort of artificial intelligence will actually complement project management and help to increase productivity. Well, that's what I believe it will be doing anyway. I'm starting to see some elements of that, or at least I did probably a few years ago, where we've seen project portfolio management software that exists that, based on feedback from the project managers entering or stakeholders entering the status of a project, it would actually read, there would be different sort of mechanisms within the tool to actually read and ascertain how the emotions of the person who was writing. So it could actually read the emotions of the person writing, which was really fascinating to me, and I'd never seen it before. So I think there will be things like, it'll be help project managers to better schedule projects. It'll probably identify and automate resource management. It'll probably help with the stakeholder emotions and feelings, as I sort of just outlined. So there'll be a lot of different characteristics that I think will come into play in here, but I think it's in project management as a whole, not necessarily the project managers themselves. And
That's
it will
good.
just, yeah.
So you basically see it as a complement to the role played by project managers in project management versus it being a threat to the profession.
100%. I mean, there's definitely going to be probably threats that apply, industry by industry. I seen some robotic machine that was bricklaying the other day. Like my husband's a carpenter, so I saw that and I was like, oh, that's interesting. But you're not going to see that. Mix the mortar or figure out if one falls off what to do. They don't have that problem solving soft skills that are needed, and I think that's what project managers bring. So definitely complement and definitely can help you to increase productivity, so if we use it wisely.
Yeah, because I've seen applications, and I'm familiar with applications such as robotics process automation, which is basically they are they're very binary. It's one way or the other, and there's no soft skill application. It's more about automating repetitive tasks. But you're right, there's situations that will require an abundance of soft skills that robots, at least in this moment in time, they cannot provide that.
Yeah, 100%. And remember, even if we want to go and automate something, and a lot of organizations go in and bring in different tools to start automating, but they don't even have the fundamental awareness around process. They have to define and document and understand their process before they automate it. Otherwise, you're wasting time and you're going to be reworking. So we just have to think about that as well.
Right. Now, moving on to your other job. You teach project management courses to university students, I believe in Denmark. And on top of that, that's also side of what else you have going on. I'm going to go into the return of Panda in a moment.
Sure.
With the rate at which new trends are emerging, have you had to make alterations to the course material that you teach your students?
So this is the best thing about what we're doing. So we partnered with the university and we actually recently got extended again, because what we're trying to do is to do learning differently. We're bringing academia and corporate, so academic theories and corporate practical experiences together. And doing so means that we're collaborating in real time. We're actually using products like Teams and things like that to actually collaborate in real time with the students. And rather than set and forget and put together, a lot of methodologies take years and years and years to define and rewrite. And then there's a new edition every 4 or 5 years.
Right.
What we're doing is we may revise 1 week to the next based on practical experiences that are happening within the project management profession that we're seeing with clients to make it real for students. And so it 100% is alterations, but the approach that we've taken enables us to do that in a swift, agile, effective way. That is what the university is actually really enjoying working with us for. So students actually get really practical, up-to-date information, not a boring, project management 101 course that was written 5 years ago and it may no longer be relevant.
That's wonderful to hear, and that's good. And I'm actually hopeful that that's something that's happening across different academic institutions where people are learning not just project management but all of the skills, because with time things become outdated and we need to stay relevant and fresh.
100%. It's the approach and the process you take to doing it that leads to the outcome. And so we've defined an approach and a process that is working, and we're now just actually piloting our introductory project management course that we've obviously co-designed with academics in a real life corporate environment in a global automotive organization. And so we're now taking what we're doing with students and applying it in corporate and vice versa. So it's really exciting. It's one of the things I'm really passionate about.
That's great. Now, speaking of passionate, I know you're also passionate about your other endeavors. Earlier, when I made the introduction, I introduced you as also the founder of Return of the Panda. Could you talk us through what Return of the Panda does and what was the reasoning behind you starting that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Return of the Panda, as the name suggests, relates to the emotion and the feeling and the look that you have after, if like me, you've had, challenges, mental health challenges. I've got anxiety and I've had that for most of my adult life. And, after a really, a really sort of unhappy day, I end up with bags under my eyes or makeup smudging and things like that. So that was where the name came in. But the reason I've been working as a volunteer for our biggest mental health organization here in Australia, and I hear a lot of stories. I've spoken at 50 events, etc. And one of the things that's come true to me is that anxiety itself is really different for each individual person. It's so different. It's fascinating how different it is. And because it's invisible, I want to give it a voice and make it create more awareness around it, but from a situational perspective. How do you feel when you get anxious in a cinema, or getting anxious in a corporate setting, or anxious traveling and, my fear of flying? So I want to make it real by bringing that situational lens to it. And so Return of the Panda is both going to be providing educational services based on situational anxiety, and also a range of products, and of which one of the first products that has been released is on our website as well. It's a coping card box set that has been created personally by me, and I've used myself to calm me down and ground me in the moment, to catch the moment before my anxiety elevates. So it's something that we're doing as a not-for-profit, that we'd be looking to do some more work with corporates and other organizations as well, to continue to grow the message and remove the stigma associated with mental health.
That's a fabulous idea. And by the way, congratulations on what you've achieved on that so far. I think this is actually very relevant. Even in project management, I've seen a lot of project managers get nervous, get anxious before a steering committee. And people need to find a way to keep themselves grounded and keep their eye, focused on the goals versus worrying about other things that may or may not be, within their control. So I'm actually excited to see that you're providing an avenue where people from all walks of life, different industries, can actually come and look at that and see how we can help them personally, overcome any anxiety issues that they may be dealing with.
Yeah, and the best thing about it, the best thing about, the reason why I created this product specifically is because a lot of the time when I've had really anxious moments, I've ended up in the bathroom stall in the office, crying or just, hiding how I was feeling. Not most people aren't comfortable sharing how they feel and letting people know they have anxiety. So this is something that you could use in private, anywhere, anytime, which is something we have to understand, that a lot of mental health avenues out there, they are more public. So, you call a phone line, you have to talk to someone, whereas I'm trying to provide alternative options because we're all different. It's a really interesting opportunity. And I did have to use project management and product management, actually, those skills interchangeably, to develop this. So it's been really good.
Awesome. My last question. I always tell every guest, this is probably my favorite question, because we bring in people from C-levels, managers, directors, and you always want to understand, how did this person get to this level? So what has helped you get to where you are And what word of advice would you give to someone that wants to pursue a career that's similar to yours?
So one of the first things I would say is I was willing to try almost anything. So when I was early on in my career, because I wanted to get as much experience as I could, I put my hand up to help out the electricians that worked in the corporate buildings maintaining. I helped out in the server room. I just observed what they were doing. I supported project managers. I remember doing reception, for an hour when the receptionist was on lunch break. I helped HR teams out, with filing, whatever it might be. So one is I always said yes and put my hand up. Anything that was offered, whether it's a train-the-trainer course, first aid course, whatever it was, I was always saying yes. And that was really easy to do early on in your career. That's one of the things that I would do, and I would suggest people do, especially early on in their career. The second thing that I think is really important is, for me early on, I didn't know much about, as I said, project management. So I was scared that if I'd stayed in one industry, that would mean that I would be possibly out of work in future. Now, that's obviously not true, but I actually then learnt to seek opportunities out in multiple industries to give me that experience that I can then use from different companies as well. So it gives me more options. And that's something that I definitely think has really helped. So there'll probably be the two of the things that I would suggest for people early on. And then also just treat people with respect and kindness. Doesn't matter where you go, because that'll follow you. I've still got colleagues that I worked with in my first job that we work together in different avenues now, that because of that relationship and networking that you need to build. So build your network and think of yourself as a personal brand as well. It may sound like, well, why would I do that? But that is what has helped me to get to where I am today. So that would be probably the top three things that I would suggest.
Fatimah, I've really enjoyed our discussion. Thank you so much for being with us today.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Fred. And I look forward to listening to more of your episodes.
Wonderful.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Ivy Podcast. Please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe on your preferred podcast listening platform. We really appreciate that effort. Until next time.